Gnome is probably one of the most popular Linux desktop environments. It comes pre-installed with two major Linux distributions, Ubuntu and Fedora. But despite being the most popular desktop environment on Linux, it's probably also the most hated one. Since the release of Gnome 3.0 in April 2011, Gnome has gotten a lot of hate. The internet discourse around Gnome is heavily polarized, with Gnome developers and apologists, I guess you could say, on one side saying how it's different and how people that bash it for nothing just don't understand, and people saying that Gnome is anti-features, Gnome eats a lot of RAM, Gnome developers are against customization, Gnome is SJW. What? On the other side. So when I kind of came out as a Gnome user in one of my previous videos, a lot of people kind of started asking, like, why are you doing this to yourself? And today I feel like we need to talk about Gnome. We need to talk about the internet discourse around this desktop environment in particular. So is Gnome literally Satan himself, or is Gnome the best desktop environment that has been ever brought to humanity? Let's find out. So Gnome is probably one of the most controversial pieces of software released for Linux. It's up there with systemd, Pulse Audio, and of course it's kind of difficult to navigate this chaotic mess of different opinions, emotions, insults, and it's just all very, very complicated. But I'll try to address some criticism against Gnome, maybe kind of play devil's advocate. But don't get me wrong, this video is not going to be about how Gnome is great. Even though I do use Gnome on day-to-day basis, I'm not a fanboy, and I realize that it has a lot of disadvantages. There's a lot of things that are wrong about Gnome, but still this video is going to be neither bashing of Gnome nor like fanboyish blabbering about Gnome. I want to stay as neutral as possible and take every point of view into consideration. So yeah, back in 2011 when developers announced the release of Gnome 3.0, the brand new version of Gnome, where they changed basically everything about the UI of Gnome 2 that people were used to and that people loved. This of course caused a lot of, disagreement, I guess you could say. And even though on the announcement page Gnome developers said that this is a new desktop environment that is released for users and developers, it's the power users in particular that really had problems with this all new version of Gnome. It was just very different. The panels were gone, there was no two-panel interface like in Gnome 2. There was only one panel, and instead of three usual menus, applications, places, system, there was only one menu called activities, where you would see all the stuff, but in a new sort of way. And of course, let's not ignore the elephant in the room. There were quite a lot of bugs in this new version of Gnome, and it wasn't very optimized for everyday use for the computers back then. And the fact that in this new version, developers started focusing not only on laptops and desktop PCs, but also tablets and netbooks, kind of created the impression that the whole interface of Gnome is just now only made for tablets, kind of like it was with Windows 8, for example. People thought for some reason that if now there is a full screen launcher and that window handles became kind of bigger, then that's it. This desktop environment is only for tablets now, laptop users need not apply. And besides, by removing a lot of features that people got used to in Gnome 2 and kind of redoing other features, Gnome devs caused a lot of anger from power users or even just normal users, which is understandable, of course. You get used to one way of operating your computer, and then with the new update, everything changes and you have to adapt to it. And besides, the brave new desktop environment is poorly optimized and it kind of looks like it was made for tablets. So since then, since 2011, a lot of things changed, and Gnome is not the same as it was 8 years ago, of course. But a lot of criticism that has been around on the internet in 2011 kind of still stays. You can kind of see the same points on Reddit or on 4chan and other places where Linux is being discussed. And while doing some in-depth internet discourse research, I kind of picked 3 points that I found come up most often. The fact that Gnome is huge and resource heavy, the fact that Gnome is anti-features, and also the fact that Gnome's workflow is unoptimized, made for tablets, new users, or sometimes even mentally challenged people. I've heard that too. So first of all, Gnome is not that much more resource heavy than other desktop environments from my experience and experience of other GNOME users. But of course, experience is not enough to justify something or to prove your point, so I decided to use facts and logic. I fired up a Fedora virtual machine, and so I went into the activity monitor, I searched for GNOME, and as you can see, here are the results. In general, if you combine all of these numbers, it'll be about 300 megabytes or something. And I think it's not that bad, considering the fact that it's actually a full-fledged desktop environment with a lot of stuff running in the background, such as, I don't know, brightness control daemons, notification daemons, network manager, all this stuff that you would, have in desktop environments. And I feel like those numbers are actually comparable to KDE or XFCE. If you launch a lot of apps, the animations become kind of clunky, and I agree that this can really create the impression that GNOME is slow and it's heavy on resources. So on my machine running GNOME, I have animations enabled by default, since this just makes the whole experience much snappier. Like, difference is day and night. And in general, I'm not really a huge fan of animations. On any other desktop environment or window manager, I don't really use animations. I feel like without animations, any user interface just feels snappier. And with GNOME, well, the fact that you're forced to turn off animations isn't really cool, but I feel like for me it's a minor thing. But the animations should be fixed pretty soon in the new version that is coming in a month or something, 3.34. So let's see if that works out. There were also a few bugs with memory management and memory leaks on GNOME. But the good thing is now they're all fixed and there is no problem with memory consumption on GNOME, at least for me. So in my opinion, at least, the fact that GNOME is huge and resource heavy is kind of a myth, because for me it's not the case. I don't feel like GNOME is more heavy or less optimized than, say, KDE or XFCE. In my experience on ThinkPad X220 on Arch Linux, GNOME was running better than KDE. KDE was kind of slow and sluggish at times, and the laptop used to get pretty hot. On GNOME, I didn't have that kind of problem. So yeah, that's basically my experience with that. Next point is a little bit more complicated to refute, that GNOME is anti-features somehow. And to be honest, I don't think that's completely unjustified. There has been a lot of controversy around GNOME removing desktop icons and GNOME removing tray icons. Those are the two topics that are very hot, that cause a lot of anger on the internet. So when I was preparing for this video, I thought to myself, why would GNOME developers remove such essential functionality from their desktop environments? And I got curious and decided to Google it. And I found that they actually had pretty good reasons for that. The desktop icons functionality was embedded into Nautilus, and it was very hacky. The implementation caused a lot of problems in systems, a lot of bugs. So they decided to remove this functionality and put this into a separate extension, which I think still exists. I didn't really go in depth into the technical aspects of the problem, and I don't feel like I'm actually confident enough to say whether this decision was justified from a technical point of view. But from what I see, this feature and the way it was implemented was kind of holding GNOME developers back from improving the code base, improving the experience of desktop environments. With tray icons, it's kind of the same story. The implementation wasn't the best, but the way it's different from desktop icon situation is that not a lot of people use desktop icons anymore. Like, I don't use them, people I know most don't use them. Tray icons, on the other hand, a lot of people use them, especially when it comes to messengers like Slack, Telegram, Discord. You kind of need tray icons for them to function, to see whether you have new messages, etc. GNOME developers, however, say that they now have 4 APIs, which basically should replace eventually tray icon functionality. They had a lot of things to say about tray icons and the way it's implemented on other systems, and GNOME developers have been moving this tray icons functionality to different places so it's not that crowded. For example, they moved weather and player controls in the notification center. They moved Wi-Fi, Bluetooth and battery in a separate menu, which is in the top right corner. And all of this is supposed to basically replace tray icon functionality. And still, even though this functionality is not available in vanilla GNOME out of the box, you can still install an extension for that. For example, that's what Ubuntu does. They ship the K-status notifications extension with their Ubuntu builds. So it's not like this functionality has been removed completely. and you can't find it at all. Of course, the fact still remains that this kind of essential for some people functionality is not available by default, but I feel like majority of people that voice criticisms against GNOME are kind of able to install stuff themselves, so I don't see the problem here. A lot of people also compared those decisions to remove desktop icons and tray icons to when Apple removed the headphone jack. But these two situations are kind of different. The reason Apple removed headphone jack is to get more money from selling AirPods. What is it that GNOME developers sell exactly that has anything to do with desktop icons or tray icons? For example, if they released an extension to bring desktop icons and tray icons back and it costs like 20 euros, then you would see the reason why they would remove it. But to me, GNOME developers removing those two features actually looks more like Apple removing the floppy drive. They got rid of a feature that was poorly implemented and that wasn't working properly, and they started working on a replacement, on something that would work better. So in this case, I don't really see a problem with that. If you want the opposite example, Windows. Windows has been carrying the same legacy code base since like early 2000s. And sure, it makes a lot of people happy because the software that they wrote in early 2000s still kind of works properly on Windows 10 in 2019. But when you carry the same legacy code into a new version again and again and again, it does come with a price. And even though it makes some people happy, it holds you back from developing a product. And I really don't think that this is what majority of Linux users want from their system. To be like Windows. Another point that I hear being expressed a lot is GNOME is not as customizable as other desktop environments. And this is also kind of complicated to explain, but I will try. Most modern Linux desktop environments are highly customizable, and they try to add every option that users ask for. If you want an example of what happens if you add every option possible to your desktop environment, look at KDE's System Settings app. There's like everything but a kitchen sink in there. And now compare it to GNOME Settings app. The reason why KDE settings and GNOME settings are so different is because those desktop environments have different paradigms. Unlike basically all of the desktop environments on Linux, GNOME is an opinionated desktop environment, meaning customizability and rising potential is not really its forte. Where GNOME shines is its default workflow. And here's exactly the part that the majority of new GNOME users have issue with. Basically what they do when they first boot up the system, they go, well, that's kind of weird. I'm not used to that. What is this? Hot corner? Seriously? Is that like a tablet UI something? Oh well, I guess I'll have to customize it myself. Yeah, let's go to settings. Wait, where are all the options? How do I rise my system? How do I make it usable? And then they look it up on the internet and they see that there's a separate app for customizing and rising everything. So they install this app. They install a lot of extensions. They make GNOME look kind of like Windows or KDE by default. One panel at the bottom, start menu, window list, tray icons, notifications, clock, and that's it. And they're kind of happy with it for some time. And then there's a new update and everything breaks because, of course, when you add that many extensions to a working system, it's just bound to break. So eventually people that use GNOME like that get disappointed and they think, well, if things are that way, if it's not that different from other desktop environments, then I might as well just use other mediocre run-of-the-mill GTK-based desktop environments, for example Budgie, Mate or Cinnamon. So then they go on Reddit, they write an angry post on r/Linux, and that's it. That basically sums up the experience with GNOME for the majority of new users, I think. This is not how you're supposed to use GNOME. If you try to use GNOME like that, you will not have a good time. I know a lot of Linux users might take an offense with that, because being able to change, customize, rise your desktop environments is one of the reasons why people like Linux so much. It's not like Windows or Mac OS where you just can change a couple of things and that's it. And if you like to customize the hell out of your desktop environment, GNOME is obviously not for you. You definitely won't like it and you'll be much better off with something like KDE or XFCE or even maybe a tiling window manager. I heard a lot of Windows people having problems while switching to Mac OS because the way you have to interact with the computer changes drastically. Like, oh, how do I cut files? How do I delete files? Wow, this is so unusual. It sucks. The interface sucks because it behaves differently from what I'm used to. Personally, I kind of thought that Linux users will be a little bit more open-minded about changing the workflow, but I guess people in general are just more conservative when it comes to the way they use their computer. But I challenge you to try and install GNOME, Don't change anything, try to learn the shortcuts, try to use it in its default configuration, and maybe you'll feel differently about it. There are also some people that are misled by the fact that GNOME is basically the only desktop environment on Linux that can be used on tablet or a convertible, and say that GNOME is basically for tablets and you can't use it on a laptop, it's for tablets. Which I kind of find funny, especially considering the fact that GNOME is pretty keyboard centric. There are a lot of shortcuts that are supposed to help you with managing windows, with switching windows really easily. I personally think that the activities menu, which is basically a list of all of your open apps, a launcher, and an applications menu, is genius. It's kind of like Launchpad on macOS, but actually useful. And the fact that it's a full screen launcher doesn't necessarily mean that it's for tablets. It just has more functionality than your run-of-the-mill start menu. You can use it to search web, search your files, applications, music, videos, photos, etc. It has basically the same functionality as KRunner on KDE, but to me it just works in a more intuitive way, and the fact that it takes the whole screen doesn't bother me. Personally, I prefer it to the way KRunner works, because on KRunner it often happens to me that I'm doing some really quick calculations and some window steals focus from KRunner and my calculations basically disappear into the void. So in this regard, the way GNOME handles it is better. Aesthetics is also a major point when it comes to discussing GNOME. A lot of people think it's ugly, it doesn't look very good, and the fact that GNOME developers recently released a petition, an article, that says that they don't want their apps to be themed, did rub some people the wrong way. But I would argue that Adwaita, the default GNOME theme, is actually pretty good for usability. See, with the themes there are always two aspects: the aesthetics and the usability. With Adwaita, developers certainly put more focus on usability and accessibility than on aesthetics. Of course, in the last version, they added a lot of polish to it. It actually doesn't look ugly anymore. Before, I couldn't stand it, especially the icons, they just looked so dated. And if you compare it to some other themes like Adapta or Ant, it just has more contrast. The elements are outlined in a way that makes more sense. Personally, I'm not really an UI expert. I don't know how to evaluate if the theme is actually good in terms of usability or not. But for me, I tried all of the popular themes, for example, Adapta and Numix and other ones on both GNOME and KDE. And with all of those themes, after a week I just couldn't stand them. And with default GNOME and KDE themes, Breeze and Adwaita, they just look much better, they make much more sense, and you can see that there's much more work put into them in terms of being able to look at your computer and work with your computer for a prolonged amount of time. And even though on the one hand I agree that UI is kind of a subjective thing, and there's going to be as many opinions on Adwaita or Breeze as there are Linux users, on the other hand there's also usability and accessibility aspect. And in my opinion, the third-party themes just don't get it right. In almost every case, the theme developers just don't have the time or the resources to optimize the theme for every screen resolution, every application, every UI element, and this causes a lot of problems. Following the aforementioned petition, even Ubuntu developers are trying to make their in-house theme closer to Adwaita. They are reworking it to borrow some elements from Adwaita so that it looks closer to stock GNOME, so there's that. But the biggest question is GNOME SGW?
Shut the fuck up for the 50th billionth time!
SGWs have been the boogeyman of Linux community ever since this code of conduct thing, but I'm glad to tell you that no, GNOME is not going bankrupt because of SGWs in foreseeable future anyway. So there you go, this kind of turned out to be a ranty video once again. At the end of the day, GNOME is neither the worst nor the best desktop environment for Linux. Whether GNOME is for you or not heavily depends on what you're looking for. If you're a fan of heavy customization, of ricing, if you want to change every option to suit your needs, GNOME is not for you. However, if you've been DE hopping for a while now and all of the desktop environments just don't seem right, and you don't mind experimenting and trying to learn new workflow, try GNOME. Just default vanilla GNOME without any extensions. GNOME certainly cured my DE hopping itch, and who knows, maybe it will help you too. So what do you think about GNOME? Let me know in the comments, but please remain civil and polite. Huge thanks to my patrons, Joseph O, Neurogamer, and everyone who's paying for my videos even though they're free. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.